On this Monday night, Russia increasingly isolated but still attacking Ukraine. The ceasefire talks and the sanctions suffocating the Russian economy.
Well, you don't want a madman backed into a corner with nothing to lose.
Plus the mounting desperation of those fleeing. And how the sanctions aimed at Russia could impact Canadian wallets. From actor and comedian to commander-in-chief. The leadership and bravery of Ukraine's wartime president. And
people on the planet are getting clobbered by climate change.
The warning about irreversible impacts of global warming.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We are following multiple threads on the war in Ukraine tonight as Russia looks increasingly isolated. For the first time since Russia invaded, talks took place between Ukraine and Russia on a ceasefire. But there was no breakthrough and nothing has stopped. This is Ukraine's second largest city, Kyiv. Ukraine says dozens of people have been killed by Russian missile strikes, though the city is not believed to have fallen into Russian control. It is very difficult to get an accurate picture of what's happening on the ground. UK Defense Intelligence says there have been multiple Russian strikes inside the country, but the bulk of Russian ground forces remain more than 30 kilometers north of Kyiv. Their advance slowed by Ukrainian forces defending an airfield. Associated Press reporter Joe Federman is in the Ukraine capital for us. Again, Joe, I know people were able to emerge from shelters and basements earlier today, but the air raid sirens have started again, and I guess the people of Kyiv face another night under Russian attack.
That's what it looks like. We did have a lull, as you said. We emerged from a curfew this morning. Some people were out. The streets were still very deserted. People are only running out for essentials and getting back home. And then as evening arrived, it's been one air raid siren after another. I think we've had 4 or 5 of them this evening. Even more ominously, though, satellite footage is showing a massive Russian military convoy making its way toward the city. They estimate its length at about 17 miles long of equipment, tanks, and so forth, supplies. So all indications are the Russians are closing in on the city.
Yeah, those satellite images are chilling. How daunting is it for people in the capital city tonight?
Yeah, I think what you have seen in recent days, I think you see a lot of national pride here. The city has remained quiet because the Ukrainian military has so far been able to fend off the invading Russian forces. So spirits, on one hand, it's very quiet, but it's also very tense. And you just have to wonder how long can they keep this going. They've done a good job so far, but it just seems like the Russian forces are going to become overwhelming at some point.
Joe, I know it was difficult to get around the city over the weekend because there's a curfew in place. I know it's incredibly dangerous to do so now. Can you give us any sense, though, of the Ukrainian defenses around the city of Kyiv?
That is tough to say, not only because it's hard for us to move, but even when you see things, they don't want you reporting it. In fact, you can get into trouble because they think that you're giving away military secrets. So it's very hard to get a gauge on that. All we can say is not only here in the capital, but in other cities, we just see fierce resistance. You see a very determined army. It may be undermanned, but morale appears to be high. The determination appears to be high, and in every location they're putting up quite the fight.
All right, Joe Federman from the Associated Press in the Ukrainian capital tonight. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you.
Ukrainian resistance is standing strong. The Ministry of Defense, they're tweeting instructions for how to make and aim Molotov cocktails. It says the end of the war is in the hands of each of us. And Russian state TV showed Vladimir Putin meeting with his top officials. He has ordered his nuclear forces onto special alert. The head prosecutor of the International Criminal Court announced today he's opening an investigation into the situation in Ukraine, saying there is a reasonable basis to believe that both alleged war crimes and crimes against humanity have been committed. Crystal Goomansingh is reporting tonight from Poland.
The Russian assault is not relenting in Ukraine. More missiles pounding Kyiv. This video captured by residents watching the onslaught. Just outside of Ukraine's second largest city, images surfacing of a school destroyed following a firefight. Similar sights in Kyiv. Russian forces now surrounding the city on multiple fronts. But so far, the Ukrainian military has dug in, holding the capital. A presidential advisor warning Russian forces, quote, "You will be drowned in the offensive. Your command is using you as meat." Thousands of residents have little choice but to flee. So many are scrambling to try and get to Poland that the route is now flooded. Some must change course on the fly. This man says he spent 3 days attempting to enter Poland with his family before heading to Romania, where they are now finally safe.
Very difficult situation now for people. We are just driving and crying because seeing how people are desperate, it's just impossible.
For those who manage to make it across the Polish border, this is what awaits them. A makeshift camp near the Medyka crossing. It's one of many. Organizers here are seeing about 2,000 people arriving daily. This mother left Ukraine with her 3 young children. They were picked up by a bus for mums with kids. While there is fear and stress, Yulia expresses gratitude.
Thank you to the volunteers who provided my children with tea, porridge, soup, sandwich during our drive.
UNICEF reports hospitals, schools, even orphanages are coming under fire. Children cannot truly escape this war.
But what if you don't have a family?
Hadi Bombak flew from Alberta to Poland. She'll soon be on the road helping to shuttle children from an orphanage to safety.
Having another vehicle and another driver there might mean that another carload of kids makes it out.
Those who were unable or unwilling to flee now hide in wait. As the fighting continues in Ukraine, more facilities like this will be needed. The United Nations estimates more than 500,000 people have already fled Ukraine. That number will keep rising. Donna?
Crystal Goomansingh in Poland, thanks. Vladimir Putin is accused not just of waging an unprovoked war on Ukraine, but of threatening the peace and security of the world. Russia is increasingly isolated. Its banks are cut off, its airlines banned from Western airspace, and its hockey and soccer teams ejected from international leagues. As Jackson Proskow reports, if Putin's goal was to divide the West, he has done the exact opposite.
With his country besieged by Russia, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy took another swipe at Vladimir Putin, formally requesting membership in the EU. Our goal is to be with all Europeans and, most importantly, to be equal, he said. Russia's attempt to shatter Ukraine has instead solidified international support. NATO and EU members have promised military aid. They've closed their airspace to Russian jets and delivered wave after wave of sanctions. The U.S. froze the assets of Russia's central bank. Even historically neutral Switzerland agreed to side with Ukraine.
If Ukraine does not survive, we cannot be surprised if democracy fails next.
At an emergency meeting of the United Nations, the sudden collapse of the post-Cold War era weighed heavily.
We are today at a crucial and historical moment. Too many times in the past, the international community has been blind or too slow in front of unfolding tragedies.
Vladimir Putin called the West's coordinated efforts an empire of lies. Yet Moscow's isolation only grows deeper. The U.S. says it will expel a dozen Russian diplomats to the UN it accuses of espionage. In a further blow, Turkey limited naval access to the Black Sea. Against that backdrop, the Pentagon says there is currently no mechanism for avoiding an accidental conflict between nuclear superpowers, and that has put limits on NATO's resolve. For now, the alliance has no plans to establish or enforce a no-fly zone over Ukraine. Donna?
Okay, Jackson, thank you.
It is never too late to stop. It's never too late to make a turn to diplomacy, to dialogue, and to negotiation.
That is Bob Rae, Canada's ambassador to the UN. He warned today against giving in to Putin's threats to use nuclear weapons. Canada is sending a third shipment of lethal weapons to Ukraine's army. Our chief political correspondent David Aiken is in Ottawa with the details on that.
Well, Donna, the Canadian government has been under pressure to do much more to support Ukraine, and today it responded to one key request, agreeing to send more weapons.
Today, we are announcing that we will be supplying Ukraine with anti-tank weapons systems and upgraded ammunition.
Those weapons include 125 anti-tank guns, together with 2,000 rockets, all coming from existing inventory held by the Canadian Armed Forces, and to be delivered as quickly as possible. That announcement was made as a Canadian Air Force C-130 transport plane was en route to Eastern Europe with some of the $25 million in non-lethal military aid Ottawa promised on Sunday, things like body armor and night vision goggles. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau also joined a teleconference Monday morning with U.S. President Joe Biden and other world leaders, where they considered their response to Vladimir Putin's decision over the weekend to raise the alert level on Russia's nuclear forces. Trudeau said allies are resolved to continue with their course.
We will not be backing down on the economic measures and sanctions that we have put forward.
Canada also announced a ban on all imports of Russian crude oil. That's more a symbolic gesture, as Canada has not imported any Russian crude since late 2019. But Canada has not yet announced a ban on imports of refined Russian petroleum. Donna.
David Aiken in Ottawa, thank you. And today, Canada's Deputy Prime Minister had this message for the Russian people.
A few brave Russian officials have spoken out against Putin's barbaric war. We encourage all Russians to oppose this war. Silence is complicity, and following orders is not an excuse. And so when it comes to Canada's response, everything is on the table.
Sanctions are hitting Russia's economy hard. At one point, the ruble, its currency, fell more than 43% against the U.S. dollar today. It did recover some ground after Russia's central bank hiked its key interest rate to 20%, more than double what it was yesterday, to help shore up the ruble and hold back a run on banks. The sanctions are an unprecedented effort designed to choke the economy and force Putin's hand. Though, as Anne Gaviola reports, they'll have an impact on the rest of the world, too.
As Russian troops meet resistance on the ground in Ukraine, financial blows are raining down on its economy. The country has in many ways become the financial pariah of the Western world, cut off from the swift global financial network.
They're being overnight taken out of the modern digital 21st century financial economy.
Monday, Wall Street shunned Russia too, as the New York Stock Exchange and the Nasdaq halted trading of Russian companies. Russia's economy in freefall, its biggest bank on the brink of failure.
If we do see a collapse, it may harm people in Russia, but it is very unlikely to take down or harm the global financial system.
Russia's economy is in a tailspin, but sanctions aren't as harmful as they could be because they don't take aim at Russian energy exports, which make up a third of its GDP, oil and natural gas from Russia that Europe depends on.
We may be doing a lot of damage to the population and the Russian economy, but it is not necessarily getting straight to the leader at the top.
Analysts say a lot hangs on the success of the sanctions, which target Putin, Russian oligarchs, and their money, yachts, and reputation.
Well, they have 6,000 nuclear warheads, and that changes everything.
This economic battle, an important one against an emboldened nuclear power.
And the financial assault on Russia has kicked into a higher gear, and household budgets across Canada won't escape. What should people brace for here?
Yeah, there's going to be ripple effects for sure. Let's start things off with portfolios. People have probably noticed the sell-off today. Expect more stock market volatility going forward. As for household budgets, more inflation on top of the inflation that we're already dealing with. You may have noticed if you've filled up over the weekend, prices at the pumps moving higher. And I'm told by gas analysts that's just the tip of the iceberg, depending on how long this drags on. Higher prices and more delays as well for food items and things that have been touched by supply chain disruptions, including items that contain microchips, from smart fridges to cars to tech devices. So what does all of this extra inflationary pressure mean for the Bank of Canada is what a lot of people are wondering. The expectation for the Bank of Canada's rate announcement on Wednesday is still a modest one, 25 basis points. But what all of this could mean is that the Bank of Canada may be forced to hold rates lower for longer. Donna?
Lots to watch for. Anne Gaviola in Toronto, thanks. 2 orphaned children commended. Coming up, their brave actions as a gunman went on a rampage in Nova Scotia 2 years ago. There are new revelations from the commission investigating the massacre of 22 people in Nova Scotia nearly 2 years ago. New evidence suggests the RCMP knew more than they admitted about the gunman who was disguised as a police officer. And an inquiry lawyer also praised 2 children for their poise while speaking to a 911 operator as they hid from the man who murdered their parents.
At one point, the kids expressed concern for elderly members of Portapic given the fires, and expressed concern for officer safety. I guess it's not my place to say what I think about the kids, but
the commission hopes to have a final report by November. Ahead, the UN's warning on climate change. A bleak warning today about the climate crisis. The UN Secretary General calls the latest findings from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change an atlas of human suffering. Heather Urix-West explains.
This year in Canada, it was the people of Lytton, British Columbia, who watched their homes burn. The farmers of the Sumas Prairie who lost animals and livelihoods to floods. And drought-stricken cattle farmers in Manitoba forced to sell herds they could no longer feed.
So people on the planet are getting clobbered by climate change. Nearly half of humanity is living in the danger zone.
The latest report from the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change warns climate is already having a staggering impact on human health. More than 3 billion people globally, that's more than 40%, are considered highly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, and 15 times more likely to die from extreme weather events.
What the report really clearly shows is that, quite frankly, right now we're not on track to being resilient to climate change in the future. And the window for action is rapidly closing.
Because while it still may be possible to adapt to future heat waves, fires, and floods, if the global climate is allowed to warm beyond 1.5 degrees Celsius, any hope of building resiliency could disappear.
The facts are undeniable. This abdication of leadership is criminal. The world's biggest polluters are guilty of arson on our only home.
Fueled by Canada's status as the 5th largest producer of the world's oil and gas.
If climate change were a car crash, Canada's in the driver's seat.
We must continue to cut our emissions and build resiliency through our society.
But while Ottawa points to its carbon tax and commitments to emissions reductions, so far Canada's greenhouse gas emissions have only continued to rise. Heather Urix-West, Global News, Calgary.
Next, the remarkable leadership of Ukraine's president. There's an update on the 13 Ukrainian border guards on a tiny island in the Black Sea who were reported to have refused to surrender. They told a Russian warship to go F yourself, and all communication was lost. Ukraine's president said they died heroically. Russia denied they'd been killed, and today that was confirmed by the Ukrainians. Ukraine's Navy now says Russia took them captive after they ran out of supplies to defend the island. They are being held as prisoners of war. Well, there's a saying that the truth is the first casualty of war, and much will be learned after this conflict is over. What's clear already, though, is the role of Ukraine's president. Volodymyr Zelenskyy trained as a lawyer, but built a career as a comedian and actor. Now he's playing a pivotal role in the future of his country. Zelenskyy was elected in 2019. During his inaugural address that year, he said this: "Don't hang my portrait in your offices. A president is not an icon nor an idol," he said. "Put photographs of your children there instead, and before making any decision, look them in the eyes." Redmond Shannon on the fierce resolve and bravery of Ukraine's president.
The president is here. We are all here
The words of Vladimir Zelenskyy on night 2 of the invasion, cutting through rumors that he had fled with a simple selfie video from the streets of Kyiv. As Russian forces approached, the US offered him support to escape. Zelenskyy reportedly rejected it with these now famous words: "I need ammunition, not a ride." History is full of leaders who run when the odds are against them. Zelensky's videos have instead reassured and inspired his people as Ukrainians dig in and defy the Russian army. Every citizen is president, he says, and a warrior. His leadership and courage earning respect around the world.
He is the embodiment of the courage of Ukrainian people.
It was only 3 years ago Zelenskyy was a TV president, playing for laughs as a teacher who accidentally becomes leader. Ukrainians who were fed up with his pro-Russian predecessor and with corruption voted him in for real. A multi-talented comedian and actor with a law degree from a Russian-speaking Jewish family. He won Ukraine's Dancing with the Stars and even voiced the Ukrainian version of Paddington.
It's interesting that the Paddington bear is fighting a big bear.
Ukrainian political analyst Orysia Lusevich says Zelenskyy has made mistakes, but his conviction is what matters now.
At the time of existential threat like Ukraine is facing today, they're all united across all languages, political parties, communities. You have absolute cohesion.
Zelenskyy says the enemy has marked him as #1 target, but he has refused to yield and rallied global support in the process. The funny man who's proving to be nobody's fool. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
And that is Global National for this Monday. I'm Donna Friesen. People around the world continue to rally around Ukraine. From Ottawa's Peace Tower to Sydney's Opera House, buildings and monuments are bathed in the color of Ukraine's flag. Thanks for watching. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.